Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is the analysis of Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. What a story. It's called Understanding Metamorphosis, or subtitled, Can You Love a Cockroach? By Jimmy. Well, I hope you finish this unbelievable story. Unbelievable story with Jimmy. What a plot. What characters, huh? Gregor Samsa wakes up one day to find out he's changed into of all things, a cockroach. And then how his family treats him. I know from the emails I already received, some of them, that some of you didn't finish the story with me. Well, that's okay. Some of you challenged my decision to even put this here as a classic. And believe me, I appreciate all your emails, good, bad, and the ugly. I love feedback, but let me tell you why, before I begin this analysis, why The Metamorphosis is in fact a classic and why it belongs on my website. First, it was written by Franz Kafka in 1912. That's a long time ago, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? So that's plenty of time passing to give it some staying power, right? You're not gonna read about Jack Reacher in 100 years, I assure you. Second, many people consider it a classic of modern literature. Not that it matters, not that that matters to me, but critics often say it offers a deep, surreal theme of alienation, existential dread, and the human condition. It does all that, but that's not what makes this book a classic. What makes it a classic is its language charged with meaning. Remember I tell you that when we analyze stories and novels and plays? To land on this website and be read by Jimmy, that book has to have language charged with meaning. And boy, does this have language charged with meaning. Also, my definition of a classic is one that we read to learn how other people lead their lives and how to lead our own. Two very simple tests, language charged with meaning, and you read to learn how other people lead their lives and how to lead your own. So, first, is the Metamorphosis language charged with meaning? You tell me. Here's the first sentence. If you remember, when Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself changed into a monstrous cockroach in his bed. Holy moly. Oh, can you charge language more than with that one word, cockroach? What a word. Ladies and gentlemen, say that, bam, people run. How do you walk away unmarked from that sentence? Huh? Every word Kafka uses means something. Every word. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But think about the simple description of Gregor's, quote, many legs, pitifully thin. I don't know if you ever saw a cockroach. I hope you did. I mean, there was plenty of them to look at. And they have many legs that are pitifully thin. Or when the narrator, the furniture is being moved out of Gregor's room, when he talks about what's going on when they move the furniture out of his room. That's language charged with meaning. So, second test. If you're wondering how you learn how others lead their life and how to lead yours, well, just look what happens to poor Gregor in the story. Look at how he's treated. How hard he worked until one day he became a cockroach. You think there are people like that in the world? No, Jimmy, what the hell are you talking about? I've never met a human being that turned into a cockroach. You haven't? Huh. Maybe you haven't lived long enough. I'm kidding. How do you treat people? The story's about how people treat people. How do people, including your family, treat you? Wait a minute. Or did others change and not Gregor? What the hell are we talking about in this story? What exactly changed in this story? I mean, we know he changed. It's the third person narrator. The beauty of a classic, ladies and gentlemen, is you can go back over and over and over again And every time you do that, you're going to walk away with more and more deeper impressions, insights, recognition of your own self in the characters you meet and watch. I know some of you are listening to this and you say, Jimmy, you're full of doo-doo. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because some people out there, I guarantee you, have been treated like Gregor was treated by his family. Some people treat other people like his family treats Gregor. And that's the beauty of this story. It's realistic, even though he's a bug, right? But you can't do that with every story, just any story. Get these insights. And you're going to say, well, I'm not a cockroach. And well, it's an impossible story. You can't just change into a cockroach. I'm thinking of at least 2 people, ladies and gentlemen, who did not physically become a cockroach, but they act just like a cockroach. Can you think of anybody? Well, of course, it depends on your definition of a cockroach. We're going to explore that in the analysis, pardon me. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to examine this wonderful story about Gregor Samsa and his relationship to his family, to his job, to life around him. And after all, you have relationships to your family, to your job, to life around you, don't you? Or are you living in a bubble? Of course not. You're alive, you have relationships. This story is about relationships, including the relationship Gregor has with himself. Did you ever feel like Gregor? I mean, you're not a cockroach, are you? Are there any cockroaches listening to me? And yet, some of you, I'm going to bet, felt like Gregor sometime, perhaps. And the way his family treated him, didn't you? And if not, lucky you. Lucky you. So, narration. Let's start as usual with the narrator of the story, who in this case is the third-person anonymous narrator. This means that the narrator is outside the story. Remember, in our discussions and analysis, there's only 2 types of narrator, inside and outside. You and I and everyone listening to me are inside the same story. We're alive in the world, right? So when we narrate, we are inside the story. So if I told you it's a sunny day now, I'm looking out at the sun, I'm inside the story. But if it's really not sunny, then I'd be lying to you, and you'd have to catch me in that lie. And once you caught me in the lie, you would never, ever, ever be able to believe me again, because how would you know when I'm lying if I'm in the story? But outside the story, the third-person narrator saying, it's a sunny day as Jimmy looked out the window, you have to believe him. You have to believe him. Otherwise, the story will not make any sense. So when he tells us he's a cockroach, you got to believe that. Third-person narrators hover outside the story. And they relay, so to speak, the events inside the story to us and what happens, what characters say, what they do. So, for example, when his father was winging apples at Gregor, we got to believe that that's what he was doing. Otherwise, the story won't make sense. So, the third-person narrator sees, hears, and knows all things. Often he's called omniscient, like God. He knows everything. So we have to believe what he says, or the story will not make any sense. Well, Jimmy, this doesn't make any sense anyway. Who the hell's a cockroach? Remember, put that aside, erase your blackboard, and just go with the flow, ladies and gentlemen. Go with the flow. Hopefully you read the story already. You didn't just jump, to this analysis. So, we know all this from the first sentence. When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from a troubled dreams, he found himself changed into a monstrous cockroach in his bed. So, who is saying that? Who says that? Well, it's not Gregor. Otherwise, it would be I. When I awoke one morning from a troubled dream, I found myself changed into a monstrous cockroach in my bed. You see, that would be a first-person narrator, but it's not. It's the third-person narrator, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Because we already saw in this story that when Gregor tries to talk as a cockroach, Nobody understands what he's saying, although he can understand what people are saying. Isn't that interesting? So we have to believe what the third-person narrator says, otherwise it will not make sense. And maybe some of you already think it doesn't make any sense. I mean, heaven's sakes, a cockroach. Notice, too, after Gregor dies, his mother and father become Mr. and Mrs. Samsa. The third-person narrator does a little shift, little dance, shifts, right? Instead of mother and father, they become Mr. and Mrs. Isn't that interesting? These are subtle things, but you should pay attention to them. So, if you're going to understand this story, and that's the goal of reading classical literature, to learn how other people lead their lives and how to lead our own, what we want to do is we have to believe the narrator. Ask yourself, what if the third-person narrator is lying, that Gregor's not a cockroach? Well, that's not possible in literature, classical literature. Third-person narrators never lie. First-person narrators might lie. For example, in Diary of a Madman by Nikolai Gogol, which is on this website, and I encourage you to read it with me, we see first-person narrator, the first-person narrator, telling us what's going on around him. So we actually, this is a beautiful story, we actually peek into the mind of someone losing his mind. It's one of the greatest stories ever written. And the narration is pure gold because we're inside a nutcase. He hears dogs talking. It's actually a pretty funny story, and it's not. It's a sad story. Diary of a Madman. But here, by the way, we never know the narrator's name, and we're going to talk about that in the Diary of a Madman's analysis. If this story will make sense, if we want to make sense of the metamorphosis, we have to believe what the third-person narrator tells us. So if you don't believe Gregor became a cockroach, none of this story makes sense, does it? Or does it? Think about this. In the story, Gregor could have woke up to change into any kind of animal. Let's give him that, right? Or maybe he did not change. He just woke up but didn't want to go to work anymore. But he didn't. It was a cockroach. That's the word that the translator used. And we're going to talk about translators in a minute. So while you can say Kafka wrote it and decided to make Gregor a cockroach, but we're not interested in anything that Kafka did or didn't do. Remember, we don't really care about the author. Well, Jimmy, how can you say that? He's the main guy. He wrote this story. Well, I'm saying forget about the author and understand, put yourself inside the story. If you're going to understand this story, forget about what you may have read, what you will read about Kafka. It's not important. You want to read about Kafka? Read his diaries. I encourage you to do that. We will not read Kafka's diaries on this website. Why not, Jimmy? Well, because it's not classical literature. It's a diary. It's his diary. And I encourage you, if you really want to get into the mind of, Franz Kafka, to read his diaries. But that's not why we're here. We're here to understand Gregor Samsa. And we want to stay inside the story. Our conclusions must be based on evidence. See, that's the beauty of a third-person narrator in classical literature. In real life, you don't know what another person's thinking, do you? Do we have glass heads? Well, I could tell what they're thinking. No, you can't. And people can't tell what you're thinking. But in a story, we have the chance to all be Perry Mason. We could prove with evidence what the person is thinking, not thinking. For example, was his father mean? Was Gregor's father mean when he was throwing apples at this poor creature? What do you think? Anyway, Kafka is just the writer, okay? Got that? Kafka is not Gregor Samsa. Some critics, if you've put me on hold and Googled some things and some stupid critic is telling you that Franz Kafka is really Gregor Samsa, prove it. Where does it say in this story? Anywhere that I, Franz Kafka, the author, am Gregor Samsa. So don't do it. Do not confuse the author, the writer, with the characters of the story. So let's stay inside the story where Jimmy was trained to stay. This is my background. All my degrees are in English. I studied a lot of literature, good, bad, and ugly. And I was trained to stay inside the darn story. In fact, one of Jimmy's college papers was called Kafka's Bug. There it is on the left. Written many years ago. I forgot the Y there. Whoops. Many years ago. There we go. I got a B. And somebody wrote at the end, good analysis. And I wrote in that story that Mr. Charles Hyder directly equates Kafka to the bug Samsa. This is a critic. He presents the necessary proof by explaining, listen to this, Kafka's actual relationship to his father. BS. Kafka, however, never directly nor indirectly states this fact. He never comes right out and says that he is the bug. In regarding theme, therefore, I shall consider the bug Samsa as merely a character, not Kafka. Who gives a crap what Kafka's relationship with his father was? Right? We all have relationships with our fathers. Some good, some bad, some ugly, right? I couldn't stand my father for many years. And then I got to understand him and I could stand him. Right? So that has nothing to do with Gregor Samsa, who turns into a crocodile. So never look too closely at the writer or his life, unless it's an essay like Emerson, which is on this website. There's a wonderful essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson called, what? Self-Reliance. Or we have Henry David Thoreau, who wrote a great essay on my website, Civil Disobedience. When authors are writing essays, indeed, you can talk about the author. We can talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson all we want, but we still should stay inside his essay to prove what the hell he's talking about when he's talking about self-reliance. You understand? Besides, as Dostoevsky said, my favorite author, you meet characters in stories and novels and classics that if you lived 3 lifetimes, you wouldn't meet them. But that doesn't make them less real than the real ones you meet. Remember, I told you, you don't know what another person is thinking, do you? But in a story, you do. And this third-person narrator who's talking to us about poor Gregor Samsa gave us a lot to think about. Okay? Questions, email me, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. So, what is a cockroach? Well, Google tells us cockroaches are ancient, resilient, and mostly tropical insects characterized by flat, oval-shaped bodies, long antennae, and a shield-like protum or dorsal plate covering their head. While often feared as household pests, only about 2% of the thousands of species are considered pests, with most acting as the beneficial decomposers in nature. They're one of the long-lasting creatures on Earth. They've been around since probably the start of everything, right? Besides, God made everything, so he made the cockroach, right? But the word itself, cockroach, think about that, cockroach. Who gave us that word? I should have looked that up for this analysis. Maybe I should pause and look it up. Maybe I'll do it later. Where it comes from, cockroach. Just that word makes people cringe. Tell me that's not language charged with meaning. If you go further into AI these days, you'll learn that the cockroach is a group that first appeared 320 million years ago. I'm not going to read all this. 320 million years ago. Holy cow. They're famous for their survival skills. Look at that, right? Well, of course they are. They've been around for 320 million years. They can live for a week without a head because they breathe through tiny holes in their body. Can you live a week without your head? I know some people who live all their lives without their head. I'm kidding. No, I'm not. They can survive for a month without food. Do you know anybody who can not eat for a month? Holy mackerel. 40 minutes underwater. They can live 40 minutes. Can you hold your breath for 40 minutes? Oh my, these guys. But they also carry salmonella and E. coli. These pests. They're adaptable. They could, think about that, ladies and gentlemen. The cockroach. I bet you didn't know all that, and I bet you can't do all that, can you? So what's Gregor? What does he become? Is that what he becomes? Or is it? This is a story, I believe, about self-image. You have a self-image, I have a self-image, Gregor had a self-image. It's the image people have of themselves. And how do you get a self-image? We're going to talk about this, right? You get a self-image by looking in the mirror, by growing up and people telling you you're a schmuck, whatever. You get a self-image. We all have an image of ourselves. And I remember a web developer who pictured himself as Don Draper of the Mad Men series. But he didn't look anything like Don Draper, but his image of himself was Don Draper, which is fine. It's fine to have an image of yourself. You can be anything you want, right? But the image of yourself often disconnects, doesn't it, from reality. If you think you're this and people tell you you're that, I would suggest that that's a disconnect and that you should try to align your self-image with what people see when they look at you. Or should you? Should you tell people? How do you tell people who you are? Your self-image. How do you project your self-image? What is a self-image? Well, you look in the mirror. Do you see reality when you look in the mirror? Jimmy's looked in the mirror lately, and like Arnold Schwarzenegger said in his streaming biography or autobiography, whatever, he looked in the mirror and then he goes, what the? And I don't know if you know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is, but you should. He was a bodybuilder. And he made great movies, right? The Terminator. Pardon me. But in his biography, as he gets old, he looks in the mirror and he says, what the? So what are you? What do you see when you look in the mirror? What do you see? Superman, Superwoman, Wonder Woman? And when you compare what you believe you are to what others see, do they match? Is there a match there? Even then, appearances, your flesh, is only part of the story about self-image, isn't it? You can define your character inside you, your soul, your spirit. It doesn't project itself, does it? Or does it? If you help someone across the street and someone sees that, that's a kindness, and they're affected by that kindness. Or if you punch somebody in the nose, they're affected by that. My wife was riding home on a train one day. They stopped at a station and she saw a guy beating the crap out of a guy, and she came home in tears and she was all upset because she had saw violence. So people are affected by the things around them, including your self-image, right? You're you. You're you. You're me. This is me. One person says something about you that you never heard about yourself, and bam, you start thinking, what if that's true? What if I am, in fact, a jerk? Other people, you tell them, you're a jerk, and they go, no, you're the jerk, right? What do you think happens on social media each and every day with people's self-images? What do you think happens? So, self-image is what people think about you, what you think about yourself, and it changes constantly, right? Or does it? Consider a smile. Regardless of how you look, when you smile at someone, it's almost automatically triggering a smile back at you. I want you to try that. Turn me off and go outside and smile at somebody. Don't do it. They'll lock you up. If you start smiling at somebody, They might say, what are you smiling about? Then a punch? No, don't do it. But you know what I'm saying, right? Some people explain the smile on their face without even being asked. Why are you smiling? The point is appearances, all appearances, communicate who we are. They do, unconsciously sometimes. Did you know your facial expressions, sometimes you can't? Do you try to control your facial expressions? I know someone who can't control their facial expressions, they don't have that poker face. So the minute you say something, they are reacting with a facial expression, and you can read them like a deck of cards, right? So matching your self-image to what people see as your image is often it's a problem. It's a problem. You can make a misjudgment. All you got to do is think about somebody that I'm thinking about right now that's in the government, and people they see this person one way or the other. And I assure you, that person is not one way or the other. People, ladies and gentlemen, are complex. People are complex. It's not, well, he's just a jerk. You may believe that, but what proves that? What proves you're a jerk? What proves you're a nice person? So, yourself about yourself to other people and what they think you are. Do you really tell yourself about yourself? Do you admit to yourself who you are? Seriously. Do you invite others to comment on you, honestly? What do you think of me? I remember, not that I'm a fan of Bette Midler, when she was in this one movie one time, and she goes, I'm tired of talking about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? I'm tired of talking about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? Who's going to tell you that you're a cockroach, right? Do you ever notice what happens in this story? Once Gregor changed, once he changed into this cockroach, communication falls apart. Roles shift. He becomes a monster. But the third person narrator told us that he understood everyone perfectly. He just couldn't communicate. Do you ever feel like that? Do you ever feel like no one understands me? I don't know what to do. No one understands me. Do you ever feel like that? The first collapse is when self-image doesn't match other people's image of you. The first thing that falls apart is communication. Communication. And ironically, once you judge somebody, once you make that judgment call on somebody, very difficult to change it. So be careful who you judge and how you judge. But communication with words is often what stimulates this disconnect between who you are and what people see you are. You understand? What if you woke up one day like Gregor and found yourself something other than what you were? Let me repeat that. What if you woke up one day like Gregor and found yourselves something else than what you were? I'm thinking, for example, of Alzheimer's, one of the horrible things. You don't know who you are. People see you, they remember who you are, but you don't remember who you are. You don't remember people around you. Do you realize how difficult that is? What do you think happens in this story? Notice Gregor's first thoughts when this happens to him, when he changes. He asks, what's the matter with me? What's the matter with me? And then he says, what if I just went back to sleep for a while and forgot all this nonsense? Ladies and gentlemen, don't you feel like that sometimes? Oh, let me just go to sleep. Just going back to sleep and forgetting about the nonsense, the bills, right? The car that you just wrecked. It's all nonsense. What is nonsense? Google says nonsense is spoken or written words that have no meaning or make no sense. I don't think that's what he's talking about here. That's not the nonsense he's talking about here. He's talking about waking up and looking at himself and finding out he's a cockroach. Sometimes nonsense is synonymous with absurdity or ridiculousness. That's certainly the case with Gregor, isn't it? It certainly is. And sometimes, doesn't our work world feel like nonsense? The mundane, the day-to-day. Gregor bemoans his fate as a traveling salesman. He starts thinking about his job. He's been working to pay off his parents' debt. He sees the clock in his room and he gets worried because of the time. He's got to go to work, but he's a cockroach. More thinking, what if he called in sick? The third person narrator tells us that he is saying this to himself. See how important that narration is? He's saying, what if he called in sick? If Gregor were narrating it, he said, what if I called in sick? It's the same thing almost, because he's telling us how Gregor's suffering. He hadn't been ill once in the past 5 years. Do you know anybody who has not been ill for 5 years, who comes to work? I was trained to go to work even if I was sick. I can tell you stories. This guy's a worker. You see, we learn a whole lot about Gregor during the initial realization of his new condition, don't we? And then his parents interrupt his thoughts, trying to wake him up to go to work. Why? Because he supports them. That's how they live. Gregor supports them, right? In Gregor's case, even as a cockroach, there's no such communication problem between his new self-image and how people see him. This is one of the geniuses of this story, why it's a classic. He becomes a cockroach. He sees himself as a cockroach, and other people see him as a cockroach. It's the perfect match. Do you understand that? That doesn't happen in real life. We never see each other as we really are. Some people have a hard time seeing themselves as they really are. So behavior impacts the image that we have of people, doesn't it? And if you change your behavior, try that sometimes. Just do something weird. I met a guy at the airport the other day. He was passing through, and I haven't seen him in 5 years, and he sees me, and the first thing he says to me, he says, "Where's your tie?" I expected to see you in a tie. Why? Because he never saw me without a tie. I'm a businessman. I was a businessman. And when I would travel, or I used to sleep in a tie because you never know who's going to knock on it. I'm kidding. But I wore a tie. Nowadays, nobody wears ties, but I did. And I once in a while, I'm going to put on a tie for old time's sake. But that's the impression I gave him. So he was surprised I had no tie. So your behavior, people will ask, is everything all right? He thought I had a bad back because I had no tie on. He sees himself when he wakes up as a cockroach, and everyone sees him as a cockroach. So this is the perfect translation of self-image. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, that never happens in real life. That's why this story is a classic. It's so important because it's a match. Most of the time, we see what we want to see. Oh, he's a jerk, right? We see what we want to see. We don't always see what's really there, do we? That takes a lot of practice and training. A lot of practice and training. And I encourage you to do that. Quit making damn judgments. Try to look at people for what they really are. Well, he's a jerk. I know look at what he did. Well, what did he do? I don't know. Why translations matter? Well, English is tough, isn't it, as a language? People say, do you speak Spanish or do you speak French or German? No. I have enough trouble with English. I studied German. I studied Latin. De gustibus non est. I studied, but English is tough. It's even more important when you do the right translation for a story like this. So I thought it would be interesting to see how we can charge the language with meaning. So Metamorphosis is one of the most debated, that first sentence we read, it's one of the most debated sentences in literature. So here, vermin. This is the standard. Instead of cockroach, they use the word vermin. One morning, as Gregor Samsa was waking up from an anxious dream, he discovered in bed that he had changed the monstrous verminous insect. David Wiley translation. This emphasizes repulsiveness. Vermin. You vermin. Would you, if you're going to insult someone, you want to call them a vermin or a cockroach? The cockroach is Michael Hoffman. That's the translation we read. It highlights the loss of dignity, blah, blah, blah. And Ungenfresher. When Gregor Samsa one morning, Monstrous Unthinkable Large Bug, Susan Bernofsky. The original German word, Kafka was German. Now, Jimmy, you just said don't consider what the writer did. I'm taking a little detour here, just momentarily, right? Ungenschirver, or however you want to pronounce it, in Middle German means an animal unfit for sacrifice. There, beautiful. Isn't that great? So if you know what that word means, it's an animal unfit for sacrifice. Now I could spend a half hour talking to you about sacrifices in the book of Genesis. But we're not going to do that. You can read the book of Genesis on my website because it's classical literature. And we can talk about animals that are fit and unfit for sacrifice. But herein lies one of the themes of the story. Do we see each other as we want to see each other or as we really are? What do you think? Do you see other people around you as we want to, as they really are, or as we think they are? And the truth is, we never see anyone like they see themselves. How can we? We have no glass heads. And they never see us as we really are. How can they? Oh my God, what a mess this world is, isn't it? Isn't it? If you can't see what a person is and they can't see what you are, how the hell you communicate? You got to trust. Well, Jimmy, I've been burned when I trust people. Well, of course, we all have. That doesn't mean you know, my wife says, you trust people too much. Well, how can you trust that 70%? You can't do it. Well, this is what makes Metamorphosis, in Jimmy's opinion, so meaningful, because it's a story about how self-image matches outside image perfectly. He's a cockroach. People see him as a cockroach. He sees himself as a cockroach. He's a cockroach. More important, it's about what happens to relationships when the image is perceived. Images have been broken. Relationships have been broken when suddenly you perceive that the person you thought was like this is like that. Don't tell me you don't understand what I'm talking about. I know you do. Some of you don't, but many of you do. I thought he was a good guy. He's always been a monster, but I love him. You see what I'm saying? There's a big difference between seeming to be and really is. John is a good boy. John seems to be a good boy. You see the difference? Is and seems? Gregor is a man. Gregor is a cockroach. Gregor is a cockroach. Gregor is a man. In this story, Gregor is a cockroach, period. Why? Third person narrator says so. He's no longer the hardworking human who's paying down his parents' debt. He's not the traveling salesman anymore. He's a bug. But inside, he's still Gregor, right? He's just a cockroach on the outside. Inside, he's still Gregor. He hears and understands English, right? The translator. Gregor sees and feels as he did as a human, but he's changed. Or did you miss that in the third person narrator when he's telling us Gregor's thoughts? So, the real examination of this story should be about how people treat each other once they know the truth about each other. Let me repeat that. This is a story about how people treat each other once they find out the truth about each other. You understand? So it's about Gregor's relationship with his family. And we all have families. What's your relationship with your family? How do they treat you once they see who you really are? Or do they ever see who you really are? This is so fascinating, isn't it? Isn't it? I came home from college one time, and I told my mother, Mom, God is dead, and she started crying. Well, Jimmy, I sent you to a Catholic school. What are you talking about? I said, Mom, I'm reading it to strengthen my faith. I'm reading Nietzsche. Oh, I hurt her. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to hurt her. Shame on me. People are repulsed by him, aren't they? Including his own family. His sister ends up using the word it on Gregor. Do you remember at the end? It. How would you like to be an it? Ladies and gentlemen, the problem with real life is that just that. We don't have glass heads, and we can never know another person or what that person's self-image is. We deal in seems. That's what we deal with. He seems to be this. This guy seems to be that. And that includes ourselves. We seem to be good, but yet why do we do bad? We seem to be bad. Do we ever do any good? What is good? What is good? What do you seem to be? And sometimes, like Gregor, when we speak, this is true, no one understands what we're really saying. Have you found that out yet? Jimmy had a great saying when he was in the business world and talking to his staff. He would be saying something, and then they would look at me with blank faces. And I would say, is my mouth working? Obviously it wasn't. Anyway, we can at times see ourselves and others by our actions. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, actions speak louder than words, don't they? So actions will tell people who you are. Your actions will define you. And we get a glimpse of who you are, who your self-image is. All you have to do is think about something that happened recently on the L train with some jerk that killed this young girl. And the actions of the people around that person when that violent crime was committed spoke volumes about the people around them. And people make excuses for the people around them that they didn't know what would happen, they didn't know. But I would suggest to you respectfully that that doesn't really matter. When you see something, and you should try to do something. And if you don't, then you're just part of that whole problem. You're part of the problem. And that's what happens in this story. Actions in relationship to Gregor as a cockroach start defining the family and redefining the roles of the family, including Gregor. So let's look at the self-image of being a cockroach a little bit closer, which, by the way, it's a powerful opening, which I tell you is so important. So here's the opener again. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Not that I need it. When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself changed into a monstrous cockroach in his bed. So here's some things that stand out to me. He had troubled dreams. Did you ever have a troubled dream? I love a good troubled dream. What do you mean, Jimmy? Because once I realize it's just a dream, I'm a pretty happy guy, right? It's just a dream. Gregor had these troubled dreams. Monstrous, that's one of the words. It's not just an insect. He's a monstrous insect. Can you imagine a cockroach the size of a human being? The word monstrous, having ugly or frightening appearance of a monster. And that's what his sister calls him, doesn't it? She later on. Monster also means large, ugly, frightening. It's a monster. Children love to be scared, don't they? When you're a kid, scare me, Daddy, scare me. Tell me a monster story. So Gregor is still in his bed, and the next sentence, the second sentence, says, he lay on his tough, armored back, and raising his head a little, he managed to see, sectioned off by little crescent-shaped ridges into segments. Did you ever look at a cockroach up close? I assure you that the third-person narrator did. The expanse of his arched brown belly, atop which was the coverlet. The coverlet, the cover, was perched, forever on the point of slipping off entirely. Oh my God, that is language charged with meaning. Imagine he's in the bed, he sees his new body, and it's being covered by a blanket, forever on the point of slipping off entirely, which means he's going to reveal himself to himself as a bug. Oh God. We all try to hide behind things, don't we? So ask Google what a cockroach looks like. This is a pretty good description of what Gregor says. So some of the wording I notice is the coverlet was slipping off, which makes sense. It creates tension. That blanket is going to slip off, and suddenly it's no longer just a bad dream. He's a cockroach. What would you do if you saw what Gregor saw? If you woke up one day and you saw, I imagine this has to do sometimes when you see, maybe a growth on your arm or whatever. What is that? What would you do if you saw what Gregor saw? Not only that, forever on the point of slipping off. Don't we cover ourselves with stuff? Hide our true selves, masks. Don't we wear masks? You see what I mean with language charged with meaning? His numerous legs, pathetically frail by contrast to the rest of him, waved feebly before his eyes. Did you ever see a bug on its back trying to right itself up with his legs? It's unbelievable. This is language charged with meaning. What's the matter with me? Gregor thought. It was no dream. So he asked himself, what's the matter? This is central to understanding the story. He goes inward immediately. He suspects something's wrong with him. He doesn't go outward and starts blaming people. He asks, what's wrong with me? With me? What's wrong with me? That's central to self-awareness. If you don't ask that question, what's wrong with me, you'll never be self-aware. What do you mean, Jimmy? Well, I mean this. As you go through life and something happens, the first place you should look for the reason things happen is yourself. Most people don't do that. It's easier to blame somebody else. My parents, they used to beat me, right? That's why I turned out like this. They don't look inside. They don't look, what's wrong with me? It's me. You understand? Remember, he had troubled dreams, but he recognizes that this change is really not a dream. Why, oh man, if it was only a dream. He's confirming the reality of the situation, and so by examining his surroundings, like all of us might do when we become disorientated, the third person narrator tells us, there quietly between the four familiar walls was his room, a normal human room. Why is the word human as an adjective on room now? Well, because he's a cockroach. It's not his room anymore. He's not a human. If always a little on the small side. Over the table on which was an array of cloth samples was spread out. Samsa was a traveling salesman. This is the third person narrator filling in all of us about who Gregor Samsa was before he became a cockroach. There was a picture, this is very important, that he had only recently clipped from a magazine and put it in an attractive gilt frame. This was a picture of a lady in a fur hat and stole, sitting bolt upright, holding in the direction of the onlooker a heavy fur muff into which she had thrust her whole forearm. That picture is going to become important. If you read the story with me, I hope you did. If not, go back and read it now. Stop the analysis. Some of the word choices I noticed was human room, right? Adjective modifying the word room. A little on the small side, that gives us the feeling of the size of the room. It's a little small. Cloth samples, right? He's a salesman. And then the picture. You remember in the story, this was the picture he clung to when they were taking furniture out of the room, And he said, they're not going to take my picture. And he puts his body on that picture. That's after he learned he can climb up walls. So I want you to think about the description of this picture for a moment. Attractive gilt frame. Decorative picture frame with a thin layer of gold leaf. But this is a magazine picture. It's not even a real photograph. It's a picture he ripped from a magazine when he was human. I want you to, this is very important to understanding this bug. So it's a picture of a lady in a fur hat and stole, an upper-class lady sitting bolt upright, her back rigid and not flexible. Maybe she looks like this. Jimmy's going to help you, your imagination. You could imagine it, but Jimmy used AI to create this. She's holding a heavy fur muff. It might look like this. Look at it for a moment. What do you see? This is an odd picture to frame, isn't it? Would you ever frame a picture like this? What kind of picture would you frame from a magazine? What do you think this means? Is it an invitation to put Gregor's hand inside that muff? Because remember, he took this before he became a cockroach. Is she pointing the fur muff at him? Is she inviting him to share her warmth? Wow, lots of meaning to this picture, isn't it? And you don't need to look at this picture. You could just delete it, right? We'll delete it. Now what? You're going to have to use your imagination. It was raining outside and the words drab weather are used. They make Gregor melancholy. What's melancholy? You're sad. There's no really reason why you're sad. You're just sad. And he asks himself, what if I went back to sleep for a while and forgot about all this nonsense? And there's the word nonsense. So he, is this all about his self-image, which now everyone can see is nonsense? Is this nonsense? But he's a bug. He's a cockroach. People have hated cockroaches for centuries. They're rapid. They run quickly, unpredictable movements. Can you imagine a worse situation for your self-image to be a cockroach? My wife used to say you can hear them at night. When she was growing up in Italy, she lived in the poor section. You can hear them at night. She hates all bugs to this day. Even the no-see-ums where we live. They call them no-see-ums. Can't see them, but boy, do they bite. Unfortunately, Gregor can't go back to sleep because he was accustomed to sleeping on his right side. And in his present state, he was unable to find the position. So he keeps rocking back and forth and back and forth. His eyes, so as not to have to watch his wiggling legs and only stop when he felt a slight ache in his side, which he didn't recall having felt before. I didn't feel that ache. You ever get an ache you never felt before? Keep growing old. You'll get there. Part of the third person narrative, in fact, it's funny. If you read this out loud like you did with Jimmy, and I hope you did, there's sometimes Jimmy would laugh. It's a funny story. Can you imagine doing what Gregor is doing? Rocking back and forth, trying to write yourself up. Then we hear a little bit about his job. Anyone who's been a road warrior can relate to Gregor's description of how he describes his travels. And finally he says, devil take it. And then he gets a light itch at the top of his belly and slides a little closer to the bedpost so as to be able to raise his head a little more effectively to find that itchy place, which was covered with a sprinkling of white dots, the significance of which he was unable to interpret. Assayed the place with one of his legs, but hurriedly withdrew it because the touch caused him to shudder involuntarily. He's learning about his new outward identity as a cockroach. Isn't it? Isn't that how children learn? They touch things, they can eat their toes. Did you ever watch a kid? In fact, he's not really sure what's happening to him. I'm not saying children are cockroaches, ladies and gentlemen. But check out this part. He truly had it in mind to open the door, show himself, and to speak to the chief clerk. By that time, the chief clerk had come looking for Gregor because they wanted him at work. Where the hell was he? He was eager to learn what the others who were all clamoring for him would say when they got to see him. If they were shocked, then Gregor would have no more responsibility and he could relax. If they were shocked at what? Him being a cockroach. Then he could relax and he would have no more responsibility. There it is. Whereas if they all they took it all calmly, well, then he wouldn't have any cause for agitation either. Okay, if they just said, well, he's a cockroach. And if he hurried, maybe he could still get to the station by 8 o'clock. He's still driving himself, telling himself, I can get to work. I've got a job to do. What does that mean? If people were shocked by the sight of him, he would have no responsibility. Or if they did see him, what does all this mean? Well, you can see he needs his identity verified. He needs people to tell him, show him, demonstrate to him that he's a cockroach. And isn't that exactly what happens to him and to ourselves? We have to verify who we are by our actions and by people's response to us. Right? When people see you coming, do they turn and walk away? Or do they run to you and embrace you? Think about that. The rest of the story, well, you know what happens when you read it with me. The slow separation of Gregor from his family, their perception of his outward appearance. I want to review just a few areas that will add to my thesis of this is a story about self-image. So Jimmy uses arrows to point in the story. And if you were reading with me, anytime you see one of these red arrows, I'm pointing to it for a reason. You can go back and study it. But I want to point out a few of these. Here's a passage here. Wherever the conversation turned to because he would hear his family talk at night. Remember that? So he would listen, sometimes they would leave the door open. He wouldn't go out all the time, but he would listen. And the conversation turned to the necessity of earning money. Gregor would let go of the door and throw himself on the cool leather sofa because he didn't want to think about it. He was a hard worker. He made monies for his family. He kept them, right? He was the earner. He was the breadwinner. For 5 years, he was the breadwinner. But now he's not. So he's burning with sorrow and shame. Does his family feel any empathy for him? Well, Jimmy, at first they do, don't they? I don't know, do they? What do you think? Can you prove it one way or the other? Go back and reread it with me. You don't treat them like a cockroach, do you, your family? Or do you? The people who support you? Some of you are children reading this with me. Do you honor your father and mother? Here's a couple of other things. I'm not going to read all this to you. This is an incident. It had been possible for her to remain in the same room with her brother with the window closed. She can't do it. She can't do it. He's just a mess. He stinks. Right? He's a cockroach. So after Gregor's metamorphosis, and there was surely no more cause for his sister to get agitated about his appearance, she came in a little earlier and saw him staring out the window, immobile, almost as though set up on purpose to give her a fright. Gregor would not have been surprised if she had stopped in her tracks, seeing that he impeded her from going over and opening the window. But not only did she not come in, she leaped back and locked the door. So she saw him looking out the window, stopped in her tracks, leaped back, and locked the door. A stranger might have supposed that Gregor had been lying in wait for her, to bite her. Naturally, Gregor straight away went and hid under the sofa. She used to come, remember? He used to hide under the sofa as much as he could. From that, he understood that the sight of him was still unbearable to her. Are you unbearable to some people? The realization that he's unbearable to his own family as a cockroach becomes reality. And then he wants his mother to see him. Some more incidents. She wanted to get her mother to safety. This is when the mother sees him and all that stuff. She says, oh my God, oh my God. As though abandoning, she fell across the sofa and didn't stir. Oh, Gregor, cried his sister, how could you do this? There's the incident of the father throwing apples at Gregor. Get out of here, you son of a gun. And consider this touching scene. He himself was covered with dust, and on his back and along his sides as he dragged around an assortment of threads and hairs and bits of food. His indifference to everything was far too great for him to lie down on his back, as he had done several times the day before, and rub himself clean onto the carpet. And in spite of his condition, he felt no shame at moving out onto the pristine floor of the living room. Admittedly, no one paid him any regard. His family was completely absorbed by Greta's violin playing, right? Etc., etc., etc. And then he dies. He dies. Remember the three tenants that were there? That they were so hygienic until they saw Gregor? So Gregor dies. And then his head involuntarily dropped, and his final breath passed feebly from his nostrils. It's a sad story. But then his family, the three of them, left the flat, which was something that they had not done for a month, into the warm sunshine. They go for a walk. This is going to be great. And they looked at Greta with her young, noble, young body. Whew. It's a sad story, isn't it? Did you feel sorry for him? Well, he was just a cockroach, Jimmy. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Plot and Aristotle. We love Aristotle. Plot's the most important thing. I'm not going to, dwell on this. You should know all this. Every time you read with me and I analyze a story, I'm bringing in up Aristotle. Why do you do that, Jimmy? Well, I do that because Aristotle was a smart guy. And he could categorize things. Plot, character, right? Plot. Plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This certainly does. What is the plot? Gregor Samsa changes into a cockroach, and then the relationship with his family until he dies. You can read all this. Pause me and read this. This is very important if you haven't known it already. It should be in your notes from our other analysis. Plots can be simple or complex. What do you think? This is a complex plot. It doesn't happen in just 24 hours. It goes on for a while. And it's complex because recognition takes place. Reversal of the situation. Gregor's a breadwinner, and then he turns into a cockroach, right? It's a complex plot. Well, some of you will argue with me. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. And if you're wondering the difference between comedy and tragedy, is this a comedy? Well, some of it is pretty funny, but it's really not. It's really not. Then there's character. Aristotle believed character was the second most important component of a tragedy after plot. And you have to admit that this is a wonderful character study of Gregor Samsa. It's also a study of his family and how they change because of Gregor. They change. We could talk about moral character, right? And the morality of this story. What is the morality of the family relationships? Who takes care of Gregor? Well, the sister does for a while, Jimmy. Well, of course she does, but who really cares about Gregor? Who really, really, really cares about Gregor after he becomes a cockroach? I don't know. You have to figure that out. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. So in Aristotle's concept of tragedy, thought refers to the underlying ideas in this story. And if you did the quick take with me, and if you read quick takes, that 10-minute summary of I have 10-minute quick takes of all the literature that's on this website. There's a 10-minute version of it. You can take that and get a good feel of it. So it's really about relationships and self-image. So how do you treat people? How do you treat your family? How do you treat strangers? How do people treat you? What if you were ugly? What is ugly? How do you know what people are thinking about you, about people around you? How do you know that? You don't. So self-awareness in itself is a very dangerous thing, especially since you change so much. And your self-image, right, doesn't really match reality, makes Jimmy want to ask, what is reality? Is it your own self-image? Or is it the image that people have of you? And if they don't match, which is the reality? You understand what I'm talking about? Was Gregor really a cockroach? Well, the third-person narrator certainly drew up him as a cockroach. But what if he wasn't? What if he was just a guy who decided to stop working? We're going to read another story like that on this website. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll tell you what it is. It's Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener. Anyway, so in Quick Take, which for this novel, I pointed out several themes. Isolation. Gregor becomes physically isolated, separated by a door, besides being a bug. The door is literal, symbolic. Isolation is the real thing in living, isn't it? We're isolated. We don't want to. What do you mean we're isolated? I have a family. Of course you do. But, you're born alone and you die alone. You're alone with yourself. Can you be with yourself? Oh, I can't. I need people around me. Of course you do. We all do. We're social animals. But being alone, what does that mean? Can you be comfortable in your own skin? Productivity. As long as Gregor works and earns money, he matters. If he stops working, suddenly, right? Who gives a crap about him? Is that really productivity? We got to work. Why? By the way, the harder you work, the luckier you get. There's nothing wrong with working. But do you feel that? Do you feel like you're worth something when you work? I certainly do. Family pressure. Gregor sacrificed. He sacrificed for his family, and now what are they doing? They're just kicking stuff around, right? Putting it kicking it in his room. The airline tells us to put our masks on first before we help others. That's pretty good advice. Did they put their mask on first before they helped Gregor? Gregor certainly, right? He was helping them for a long time, for 5 years. Gregor understands everything, but no one understands him. He has an inability to communicate, and that's the tragedy at the center of the story. It's the tragedy at the center of all our stories. You understand? English is a tough language. Not only that, it's just words, and words fall short. I love you. What does that mean, I love you? What is love, right? What do these words mean? Cockroach. We all know what that is, right? Oh, cockroach. The body has fate. So, Bartleby the Scrivener is the parallel. That's the analysis of the Metamorphosis. It's about a bug. Can you love a bug? I was going to put another section in here about the fairy tale Beauty and the Beast, but I didn't do it. I want you to think about that. Maybe we'll read that fairy tale one day. I don't know. But, or it's like the Elephant Man. Can you love? There was a great Twilight Zone where people were, they had like these little pig noses, everybody did except for this one person they had. I think it was Ellie. She played in the Clampets. She was wrapped up in a bandage, and they were trying to make her look like everybody else, but she was just a human being. What is self-image? What do we look like to ourselves? And how do we treat other people? How do we do that? You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy's analysis of Franz Kafka's classic, The Metamorphosis. Okay? Be sure to visit and read other classics on this website. If you have a question, comment, critique, you want to say something to me, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Let me hear from you. Let me hear from you. And ladies and gentlemen, when you go out today, just think about who you are and try to think about who you really want to be, who you are. What is your self-image? How do people see you? How do you see other people? And as they say, judge not, lest thou be judged. There was a lot of judging in this story, wasn't there? Once they saw he was a cockroach, oh God, he just get away from me. Get away from me. And yet, that was their son. That's the secret of this whole story. Gregor was their son. Their son.